In this video, I want to show you how to use some simple tools to strip insulation off of wires and cables. This is something you're going to have to do a lot of as you build your system, and the approach you take depends on the size of wire or cable you're dealing with. These are wire strippers, and I strongly recommend you get a set because of all the different things they can do. In a second, I'll be showing you how they actually strip wire, but this tool is really more than that. It's a set of small pliers up here. You can crimp solderless connections using this part of the tool here, and it's also a terrific little bolt cutter. Little bolts and machine screws like this are not unusual in the whole realm of electricity, especially just regular house wiring uses little fasteners like this. But if you've got one that's too long, and you just say cut that with some wire cutters or something, you'll never get it to thread in properly because the threads are going to be deformed. So here on the pliers, the wire strippers, you've got different bolt sizes. So 1032, 832, 632, 1024. And if you want to cut a bolt, let's see, I think that would be 832 there, you thread it in. This is a threaded part. This top section is threaded, and this other section is not. It just goes right through. But the interface between the two is like a pair of shears, like a pair of scissors. So when I've got it in here, I just give it a squeeze. The excess falls off. Now you can see there's the end of the little machine screw in there, but any deformation of the threads is going to be fixed as I pull it out. So now I have a perfectly cut little machine screw, all part of what these strippers will do. So let me show you how to actually strip wire with these now. So I have some 10 gauge stranded wire. So by stranded I mean the internal copper conductor is made out of strands. And of course, in order to use this to carry electricity, I have to be able to take the insulation off. The insulation stops the movement of electricity except along the length of the conductor. Now this is 10 gauge right here, and that just refers to the diameter of the actual conductor. And because it's a gauge number, the smaller the number, the bigger the wire is. So 12 gauge wire is smaller than 10, and 14 gauge is smaller than 12, and so forth. So if I look here on my wire strippers, I'm going to see that there's a spot. It says 10. Well, that's 10 gauge wire, so for 10 gauge wire. So I'm going to put this in here, and this is circular, so it's going to cut through the insulation, but not the conductor. So I kind of take a couple of bites at it to complete the cut all around, and pulling this off. There. I've exposed the conductor, and I can make my connections now. The same sort of thing would apply to stripping insulation off these wires that are contained in a cable. This kind of flexible exterior grade rubbery cable is some part of most off-grid power systems. So you're going to run into cables like this, maybe even larger in size. But before we get to the stripping of the insulation off the individual conductors, we have to get into the cable, and that's what I want to show you now. So if you're working with flexible cable like this, that's what the end is going to look like when you get it from your supplier. And your first step is to cut through the outer husk and peel it back so that you can get into the wires to strip the insulation off them. But the challenge is you don't want to cut so far through the outer husk that you start cutting into the insulation of the underlying wire. So it takes a bit of finesse. You're going to need a sharp utility knife. This happens to be my favorite at the moment. I have no reason to recommend it except it's a great knife, mostly because I push this button and you can flip it, and there it's ready to use. You can flip it back. Very easy to slip into your pocket. It's small, cuts well. Some models have a little onboard storage for other blades. So this is the best utility knife that I've ever used, and I get to test lots of them. So anyway, let's get down to business here. What you want to do is you want to slice this gently. You're just going to want to use your eyeball to kind of decide how far you want to go, and err on the side of being a little bit too shallow. But the idea is that it's kind of like opening up a fish that you're cleaning. Now you can use the utility knife here to sever this all around evenly, or a pair of wire cutters that'll work well. Now these cables always have other things in them other than the wires itself, so you'll want to trim those off too. So now we're left with the conductors to strip in the same way. I'm going to show you how to find out what diameter, what size these conductors are, so you can strip them more easily. Every cable in the world is going to have information about it stamped into the side. So in this case, this is the number you want to look for. You see how it says 12? So AWGX3C. That other stuff, the letters, just talk about the composition of the outer husk and where you can use this and things. But the main thing to know is that this is 12 gauge conductors. So going back to our wire stripper, we look for the 12, which is the second largest hole, and we're working on this end here. So we just put it on, bite through in a couple of places, and pull off. Now, for any connection work, you're always going to want to twist these finely stranded conductors. I'm going to show you more about that later, but it's pretty simple. You just choose the right size and pull it off. Now, sometimes, actually fairly often, you are going to be dealing with conductors that are too large to use these wire strippers, at least in this kind of a project, because you're dealing with DC current, relatively low voltage. That translates into high amperage for a given power output. So, this is another approach that uses that utility knife, as I'll show you in a sec. So when you're dealing with a conductor that's too big for your wire strippers, you just kind of whittle off the insulation. See, I'm going for a bite here, and then I'm pushing it with my thumb. So I'm controlling the angle, and I'm pushing it with my thumb. I'm not kind of whittling away like a piece of wood, because the knife's going to fly around a whole lot more than it needs to that way. But you just kind of power it along with your thumb, and you don't even necessarily need to do it all the way. You can do some peeling too, and there you go. If you scratch the wire a little bit, the conductor, it's no big deal, especially with these bigger conductors. With a more finely stranded conductor, you might actually even cut into them and sever them. That wouldn't be great, so try to keep that to a minimum. But many times when you're stripping wire like this, you can take another shot at it. I mean, let's say I messed this up. Chances are the other end of the cable is still pretty long, and I can just go at it again and continue that way.